Sharon Ellis had walked the frozen streets of Seattle for hours, the wind cutting through her jacket like knives. Then she heard it, a faint, desperate cry that would change the course of her night and her life. Welcome to Stories by Jason. If you're hooked in and you're ready to enjoy this story, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one. And you don't want to miss it. Now let's get into it. The cold bit through Sharon Ellis's thin jacket like teeth through paper. She pulled the torn edges of her blanket tighter around her shoulders, but it was useless. The fabric had worn through in so many places it barely qualified as protection anymore. Just decoration for dying, she thought, then immediately pushed the thought away. Thinking like that was dangerous on nights like this. 23 degrees. She'd heard someone mention it earlier, back when the coffee shop on 5th was still open and warm air leaked out every time the door swung wide. That was hours ago. Now, past midnight, the temperature had probably dropped even further. Sharon's breath came out in visible puffs that disappeared into the darkness of downtown Seattle's empty streets. Her stomach cramped with hunger. She hadn't eaten since yesterday morning when a food truck worker had given her half a breakfast burrito before his manager noticed. The protein bar in her backpack was gone. She'd checked 3 times already, as if hoping would somehow make it reappear. Sharon turned down an alley she'd scouted earlier, looking for the covered loading dock where she sometimes slept. Her boots, 2 sizes too large and held together with duct tape, shuffled against the frozen pavement. She was so tired. Every part of her ached. Her fingers had gone numb an hour ago. Now her toes were following. Just a few more steps. Find the corner. Sit down. Try to stay awake until morning. Then she heard it. A sound, barely audible over the wind. A whimper, thin and desperate. Sharon stopped, her body tensing. In her 7 months on the streets, she'd learned that sounds like that could mean danger or opportunity. Usually danger. She should keep walking. She knew that. But something in the sound pulled at her, a thread connecting to a part of her she thought she'd buried months ago. The part that still believed people helped each other. Sharon followed the sound past a dumpster, into a narrow gap between 2 buildings. What she found made her forget about the cold. An elderly woman sat crumpled against the brick wall, trembling violently. She wore a nightgown, elegant but completely inadequate for the weather. On her feet were indoor slippers, the kind with memory foam and no traction. Her silver hair hung loose around her face, and her eyes stared at Sharon with a mixture of confusion and terror. "Please," the woman whispered. I can't remember." Sharon dropped to her knees, her own exhaustion forgotten. The woman's skin looked gray in the dim light. Her lips had a blue tinge. Sharon had seen hypothermia before, in an old man who'd died behind the bus station last winter. She knew what she was looking at. This woman would die out here. Tonight. Maybe within the hour. "Hey, it's okay. I'm Sharon. Can you tell me your name?" Sharon's voice came out steadier than she felt. "Eleanor. I'm supposed to be somewhere. Home." The woman's eyes clouded with confusion again. Where is home? Sharon's mind raced. She could leave. Find someone official, someone who actually had the power to help. But that would mean leaving this woman alone, and Sharon knew how fast the cold worked. By the time she found help and brought them back, Eleanor might already be gone. She could call 911. But Sharon's experience with authorities hadn't exactly been positive. The last time she tried to help someone, the police had threatened to put her in juvenile detention. They'd confiscated her backpack, and it had taken her 3 days to get it back minus everything valuable inside. Eleanor started to slump sideways, and Sharon caught her. The woman was tiny, fragile as bird bones under Sharon's hands. She probably weighed less than Sharon did. "Okay," Sharon said, more to herself than to Eleanor. "We're going to be fine." She unwrapped the blanket from her own shoulders. The cold hit her immediately, a physical blow that made her gasp. Sharon gritted her teeth and wrapped the blanket around Eleanor instead, tucking it as tightly as she could. "No," Eleanor protested weakly. "You'll freeze." "I'm tougher than I look," Sharon lied. She positioned herself beside Eleanor, pressing close to share what little body heat she had. Then she took off her jacket and draped it over both of them. Her thermal shirt underneath was thin, but it would have to be enough. Sharon dug through her backpack and found the crushed granola bar she'd been saving. Half of it was probably just crumbs now, but it was food. She broke off pieces and held them to Eleanor's lips. "Try to eat something. Just a little bit." Eleanor's hands shook too badly to hold the food herself, so Sharon fed her like you'd feed a small child. Between bites, Eleanor kept asking where she was, who Sharon was, why she was outside. Each time, Sharon answered patiently, even as her own body started to shake with cold. Across the city, in a mansion overlooking Puget Sound, Vivian Hayes stood in her mother's empty bedroom and tried not to panic. Eleanor's slippers were missing. Her coat was still in the closet. The house security logs showed the back door had opened at 6:47 p.m., nearly 6 hours ago. "How did none of you notice?" Vivian's voice was ice. The head of security, Marcus, looked genuinely stricken. "We were doing the shift change. The kitchen staff thought she'd gone to her room. The evening nurse thought she was with you. By the time we realized, get every available person. I want teams in every direction. Check hospitals, shelters, anywhere she might have walked." Vivian was already moving, grabbing her coat and keys. "Pull up traffic cameras from every street within 2 miles. If she's on foot, she can't have gotten far." But even as she said it, Vivian knew the truth. Her mother had early-stage dementia. When confusion set in, Eleanor could walk for miles without knowing where she was going. And it was 23 degrees outside. Vivian ran to her SUV, her hands shaking as she started the engine. "Please," she thought, "please let her be okay." Back in the alley, Sharon held Eleanor upright as the older woman started to doze. She couldn't let her fall asleep. She'd heard that people with hypothermia who fell asleep often didn't wake up. "Eleanor, stay with me. Talk to me about something. Anything." "So cold," Eleanor murmured. "I know. But morning's coming. Just a few more hours." Sharon's own voice sounded distant to her ears. Her hands had gone completely numb. She couldn't feel her feet anymore. But she kept her arms around Eleanor, kept whispering reassurances, kept them both as warm as two freezing people could manage in an alley in downtown Seattle. Somewhere in the darkness beyond, headlights swept across distant buildings as Vivian's SUV prowled through the streets, searching. Sharon didn't see them. She was too focused on keeping Eleanor breathing, on staying conscious herself, on making it through what might be the longest night of her life. The first hour was the hardest. Sharon learned quickly that keeping Eleanor alive meant keeping her awake, keeping her talking, keeping her from slipping into the kind of sleep that looked peaceful but wasn't. Every time Eleanor's eyes started to close, Sharon would shake her gently, ask her questions, tell her stories about nothing at all. "Eleanor, tell me about your house. What's your favorite room?" The conservatory," Eleanor mumbled. Her words were starting to slur. "So many windows. I can see the water." "That sounds beautiful. What else can you see?" But Eleanor had already forgotten the question. She stared at Sharon with unfocused eyes. "Do I know you?" "I'm Sharon. We're waiting together, remember? Just until morning." "Morning," Eleanor repeated, as if testing the word in a foreign language. Sharon rubbed Eleanor's hands between her own, trying to generate warmth through friction. Her own hands had moved past numb into a distant aching that felt almost worse. At least when they were numb, she couldn't feel the pain. The wind picked up around 1 in the morning, howling through the alley like something alive and hungry. Sharon shifted their position, putting her own body between Eleanor and the worst of the wind. The blanket kept slipping, and Sharon had to adjust it every few minutes, tucking it tighter even as her fingers fumbled with the cold. That's when she heard footsteps. Sharon tensed. A group of teenagers appeared at the mouth of the alley, their laughter carrying sharp and clear in the frozen air. They were dressed for the weather, she noticed bitterly. Real winter coats. Gloves. Scarves. One of them spotted Sharon and Eleanor and nudged his friend. "Yo, check it out." They wandered closer, phones out, already recording. "Please," Sharon said, her voice cracking. "Can you call for help? This woman needs a hospital." The tallest one laughed. "What, like 911? For a couple of homeless people?" They don't even come out for that anymore. She's not homeless. She's lost. She needs help. Sure she does. Another teenager pointed his phone camera directly at them. This is going to get so many views. Look at this. Tragic. They weren't going to help. Sharon could see it in their eyes, in the way they treated this like entertainment rather than an emergency. Anger flared hot in her chest, briefly warming her. Get out of here, Sharon said quietly. What was that? I said get out. Sharon's voice was stronger now. Unless you're going to help, leave us alone. The teenagers exchanged glances, then backed away, still laughing. One of them shouted something crude over his shoulder. Sharon didn't process the words. She was too busy making sure Eleanor was still breathing. 20 minutes later, a different kind of trouble found them. A man in a store uniform appeared, probably from the 24-hour convenience store on the corner. He looked at Sharon and Eleanor with the kind of expression Sharon had seen too many times before. Disgust mixed with annoyance. You can't stay here, he said flatly. Please, just until morning. She's sick. She needs. I don't care what she needs. This is private property. You're loitering. I'm calling the cops if you're not gone in 5 minutes. Sharon's stomach clenched with fear. The police. They'd ask questions. They'd want to know where Sharon's parents were, why she wasn't in school, why she was on the streets. They'd separate her from Eleanor, and worse, they might take her backpack, the only thing she had left of her old life. Inside that backpack, wrapped in a plastic bag to keep it safe, was her father's locket. The last thing he'd given her before the cancer took him 8 months ago. The last proof that she'd once had a family, a home, a life that made sense. We'll move, Sharon said, even though she knew Eleanor couldn't walk. Even though moving would mean losing what little shelter the alley provided. The store owner watched them for a moment longer, then shook his head and disappeared. Sharon looked down at Eleanor, who had started trembling more violently. Her lips were definitely blue now. Her skin had taken on a waxy quality that made Sharon's chest tighten with fear. I know you're cold, Sharon whispered. I'm cold too. But we're going to make it. My dad used to say that strength isn't about never falling down. It's about getting back up. So we're going to keep getting back up, okay? Eleanor's eyes focused on Sharon for a moment, really focused, and she reached up to touch Sharon's face with a shaking hand. You're just a baby. You shouldn't be out here. Sharon felt tears prick at her eyes but blinked them back. Crying wouldn't help. She thought about her father, about how he'd always known what to do in a crisis. He'd been a paramedic before he got sick. He would have known exactly how to help Eleanor. But he was gone, and her mother had vanished 3 weeks after the funeral, leaving Sharon alone in their apartment until the rent ran out and the landlord changed the locks. 7 months of sleeping in bus stations and under bridges. 7 months of learning which dumpsters had the least spoiled food, which alleys were safe, which shelters turned away 14-year-olds because they were too young to be unaccompanied. 7 months of becoming invisible. But tonight, Sharon couldn't be invisible. Tonight, someone needed her. Vivian Hayes sat in her SUV outside the police station, her phone pressed to her ear so hard it hurt. Nothing on the traffic cameras, Marcus reported. We've checked a 10-block radius. If she went further, then check 20 blocks. Check the entire city if you have to. Vivian ended the call and pulled up the security footage on her tablet for the 100th time. There was her mother, slipping out the back door in her nightgown and slippers, moving with the kind of purposeful confusion that characterized her dementia episodes. She thought she was going somewhere specific. But where? Vivian had already checked the old house where Eleanor grew up, demolished 5 years ago for a condo development. She'd checked the restaurant where Eleanor and Vivian's father had their first date, closed down in 2019. She'd checked the park where they used to walk. Nothing. The police had been sympathetic but not particularly helpful. They'd filed a missing person report and promised to keep an eye out, but Vivian knew how these things worked. Eleanor was one of dozens of vulnerable people who went missing every day. Without immediate evidence of foul play, she was low priority. Vivian started driving again, moving slowly through downtown streets, studying every doorway and alley. Her eyes burned with exhaustion, but she couldn't stop. Wouldn't stop. Somewhere out there, her mother was alone and afraid. And it was Vivian's fault for not having better security, for not watching more carefully, for not. The thought cut off as she turned down another street, her headlights sweeping across empty sidewalks. Eleanor had stopped responding to Sharon's questions. Sharon shook her harder, panic rising. Eleanor! Eleanor, wake up. You have to stay awake. Eleanor's eyes fluttered but didn't open. Her body was dead weight against Sharon's side. Sharon tried to stand, thinking maybe she could drag Eleanor to the convenience store, force them to call an ambulance. But her legs wouldn't cooperate. She'd been sitting on frozen pavement for hours. Her muscles had seized up. When she tried to shift Eleanor's weight, her own strength failed and they both started to slip sideways. Sharon caught them at the last second, crying out with the effort. Her arms screamed in protest as she pulled Eleanor upright again, settling them both back against the wall. I won't leave you, Sharon whispered, even though Eleanor probably couldn't hear her. I promise. I'm right here. Her own vision was starting to blur at the edges. The cold had worked its way so deep into her bones that she could barely remember what warmth felt like. She was so tired. So incredibly tired. In the distance, maybe 3 blocks away, headlights swept across a building. A black SUV, moving slowly, methodically searching. Sharon tried to call out, but her voice was too weak to carry. The SUV turned down a different street and disappeared. Sharon's head dropped forward. She forced it back up. Just a little longer, she told Eleanor. Told herself. Just hold on a little longer. The city slept around them, and somewhere in the darkness, Vivian Hayes kept searching for a mother who was closer than she knew. The world had narrowed to a single point, keeping Eleanor breathing. Sharon no longer felt the cold as something external. It had become part of her, woven into her muscles and bones. She existed in a strange state between consciousness and something else, her body moving on instinct while her mind drifted. Eleanor had stopped responding entirely around 2 a.m. Sharon slapped her own face, hard, forcing clarity. She couldn't afford to drift. Not now. She adjusted Eleanor's position, propping her more upright against the wall. The blanket had become damp with melted frost, but Sharon re-wrapped it anyway, layering it over Eleanor's chest and tucking the edges under her legs. Then she pressed close, wrapping her arms around the older woman, sharing what little warmth remained between them. Stay with me, Sharon whispered into Eleanor's silver hair. Please. Just stay. She started talking, not sure if Eleanor could hear but needing to fill the silence. She told her about her father, about how he used to make Saturday morning pancakes with chocolate chips arranged into smiley faces. About how he'd taught her to ride a bike in the park, running alongside her until she finally found her balance. About the way he'd sung old rock songs off-key while doing dishes. She didn't talk about the cancer. Didn't talk about watching him fade away in a hospital bed that smelled like antiseptic and defeat. Didn't talk about how her mother had looked at her afterward with eyes that saw nothing, as if grief had erased Sharon entirely. Eleanor stirred slightly, and Sharon felt a surge of hope. That's it. Come on. Stay awake. Eleanor's eyes opened, unfocused at first, then gradually finding Sharon's face. For a moment, real recognition flickered there. Not memory of who Sharon was, but awareness of what she was doing. Angel, Eleanor breathed. You're an angel. Sharon almost laughed. She was covered in grime, wearing clothes she'd pulled from a donation bin, shaking so hard her teeth chattered. If there were angels in the world, they definitely didn't look like her. I'm not an angel. I'm just Sharon. My angel, Eleanor insisted. Her hand found Sharon's and squeezed with surprising strength. Thank you. Thank you for not leaving me. Something broke open in Sharon's chest. She'd spent 7 months building walls around herself, learning not to need people, teaching herself that survival meant isolation. But Eleanor's gratitude, simple and sincere, cracked those walls. I won't leave you, Sharon said, and meant it with every frozen fiber of her being. I promise. Eleanor's moment of clarity faded as quickly as it had come. Her eyes clouded again, and her hand went slack in Sharon's. But Sharon held on tighter, as if she could keep Eleanor tethered to consciousness through sheer force of will. The real fear crept in around the edges of Sharon's determination. What happened when help finally came? Would they separate them immediately? Would the police see a homeless teenager and assume the worst? Would they take Sharon to some facility where counselors would ask questions she couldn't answer and make decisions about her life without letting her speak? Or worse, what if they found her mother? The woman who'd walked away without looking back, who'd left Sharon to navigate a foster system that had no room for her, who'd never once tried to find her. Sharon had learned to survive on her own. She didn't need rescuing. Except tonight, Eleanor needed rescuing, and Sharon couldn't do it alone. The contradiction twisted inside her, creating a knot of fear and frustration she couldn't untangle. Vivian sat in a police cruiser, studying the enhanced security footage on the officer's laptop. The tech team had cleaned up the image, and now she could see her mother's face more clearly in the moment she slipped out the back door. Eleanor wasn't confused in this footage. She looked determined, purposeful, like she knew exactly where she was going. "Do you recognize anything in her expression?" Detective Sarah Chen asked. She was young for a detective, maybe early 30s, with kind eyes that suggested she actually cared about finding Eleanor. "She looks like she used to," Vivian said quietly. "Before the dementia. Like she's on a mission." "Any idea what that mission might be?" Vivian shook her head. But something nagged at her, a memory hovering just out of reach. Her mother had been talking about something earlier that day, during one of her clearer moments. "Something about the soup kitchen," Vivian said suddenly. "She used to volunteer at a soup kitchen downtown. Before she got sick. She mentioned it yesterday, said she needed to help with the dinner service." Detective Chen was already typing on her phone. "Which one?" "Sacred Heart Mission. On 3rd and Pine. That's 6 blocks from here." Chen grabbed her radio. "All units, expand search to 3rd and Pine corridor. Subject may have been heading to Sacred Heart Mission." Vivian was already moving toward her SUV. 6 blocks. Eleanor had been gone for 7 hours. Even walking slowly, she could have made it there and wandered off in any direction. The mission would be closed now, but there were alleys, doorways, places where someone confused and cold might try to find shelter. Vivian's hands shook as she started the engine. She was running out of time. She could feel it in her bones, the way you feel a storm coming before the first drops of rain. "Please," she whispered to no one. "Please let her be alive." A door opened somewhere nearby, spilling light and sound into the alley for a brief moment. Sharon looked up, hope flaring. A woman stood in the doorway of what looked like a small restaurant or bar, taking out trash. She glanced at Sharon and Eleanor, and for a moment their eyes met. Sharon tried to speak, to ask for help, but her voice came out as a whisper. The woman hesitated, her expression uncertain. Sharon could see the calculation happening behind her eyes. Help or ignore? Get involved or walk away? The woman looked away first. She dumped her trash and went back inside, closing the door firmly. The lock clicked with a sound that felt like a judgment. Sharon understood. She'd been on both sides of that equation. Before she was homeless, she'd walked past people on the streets too, telling herself that someone else would help, that it wasn't her responsibility, that she didn't have time or resources or energy. Now she knew differently. Now she understood that every person who walked past was making a choice, and most chose to look away. She repositioned Eleanor again, trying to keep her from slumping too far forward. Eleanor's breathing had become shallow and irregular. Sharon pressed her ear to Eleanor's chest and heard the fluttering heartbeat, rapid and weak. "No," Sharon said firmly. "You don't get to give up. We're too close. It's almost 3. Just a few more hours until sunrise. You can do this." She rubbed Eleanor's arms vigorously, trying to stimulate circulation. She took off her own shirt, now wearing only a thin undershirt, and layered it over Eleanor's chest under the blanket. The cold hit Sharon like a physical blow, stealing her breath. Stars danced at the edges of her vision. Her body was shutting down, she realized with distant clarity. She was approaching her own limits. Sharon closed her eyes just for a second, just to rest. When she opened them again, she couldn't remember closing them. How long had it been? Seconds? Minutes? Eleanor was slumped heavily against her, and Sharon couldn't tell if she was breathing. "Eleanor." Sharon shook her, panic cutting through the fog. "Eleanor, please." A faint breath. Sharon felt it against her neck. Still alive. Still holding on. Sharon tried to adjust their position and the world tilted violently. She was going to pass out. She could feel it coming, her body's final protest against the cold and exhaustion. She forced her eyes to stay open, staring at the mouth of the alley where the street was visible. Empty sidewalks. Dark windows. A city that had forgotten they existed. Then in the distance, headlights. They moved slowly, methodically, sweeping across buildings and doorways. A black SUV, the same one she'd seen earlier. It was closer now, maybe 2 blocks away. Sharon tried to lift her arm, to wave, to signal somehow. But her body wouldn't respond. She could only sit there, holding Eleanor, watching the headlights approach with agonizing slowness. The SUV turned onto their street. Sharon's vision tunneled. The headlights became the only point of light in a world going dark. "Please," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if any sound came out. "Please see us." The SUV moved closer. 1 block away now. Sharon's head dropped forward. She forced it back up, fighting consciousness with everything she had left. The headlights swept past the alley entrance, illuminating the mouth of the passage for a brief, brilliant moment. Then the SUV kept driving, moving past them toward the next block. Sharon's last thought before the darkness took her was a single, desperate prayer that someone, anyone, would come back. Sharon woke to someone shaking her. Not gently. Hard, urgent shaking that pulled her back from wherever she drifted. Her eyes wouldn't focus at first. Everything was blurred shapes and muted colors, like looking at the world through frosted glass. "Hear me? Can you hear me?" A man's voice. Close. Sharon tried to pull away, protective instinct overriding everything else, but her body wouldn't cooperate. "It's okay. You're okay. I'm not going to hurt you." The voice belonged to a delivery driver, Sharon realized as her vision cleared slightly. He wore a brown uniform and was crouched beside them, his face creased with concern. "This woman needs help," Sharon managed to say. Her voice sounded strange, distant. "Please. Hospital. I already called 911. They're coming." He pulled off his own jacket and draped it over both of them. "Just hang on. Both of you." Sharon wanted to thank him, but the words wouldn't form. She was so tired. The darkness kept trying to pull her back under, and it would be so easy to let it. But Eleanor's weight was still against her side, still depending on her. Sharon forced her eyes to stay open. The sky had begun to lighten at the edges, that deep pre-dawn blue that meant morning was coming. They'd made it through the night. Almost. The delivery driver stayed with them, talking on his phone, giving their location to the dispatcher. Sharon heard sirens in the distance, growing closer. "You did good, kid," the driver said. "You saved her life." Sharon wasn't sure about that. Eleanor still wasn't moving, still barely breathing. Saved felt like too strong a word for just barely surviving. The temperature had dropped even further as dawn approached, the coldest point of the night. Sharon's whole body had gone numb. She couldn't feel her fingers or toes anymore, couldn't feel much of anything except Eleanor's weight and the desperate need to keep her eyes open. Headlights swept into the alley. Not an ambulance. A black SUV, the same one that had passed by earlier. The driver's door flew open and a woman emerged, running. Vivian had circled back to the 3rd Street corridor for the 5th time when she saw the delivery truck stopped in the middle of the alley, hazard lights flashing. Her heart seized. She slammed on the brakes and was out of the SUV before it fully stopped, running toward the truck driver who was waving urgently at her. "There," he shouted. "Against the wall." Vivian saw the blanket first. Then the silver hair visible above it. Then, impossibly, a small figure holding her mother upright. "Mom!" Vivian's scream tore from her throat. She dropped to her knees beside them, her hands reaching for Eleanor's face. Her mother's skin was gray, lips blue, eyes closed. But she was breathing. Barely breathing. Oh God, Mom, I'm here. I've got you." Eleanor's eyes fluttered open, confused and unfocused. "Vivian?" "Yes, it's me. You're okay. You're going to be okay. Vivian's training kicked in, the first aid courses she'd taken years ago. She checked Eleanor's pulse, weak and irregular. Checked her pupils, responsive but slow. Signs of severe hypothermia. Then she looked at the girl holding her mother. The teenager was tiny, couldn't have weighed more than 90 pounds. Her lips were as blue as Eleanor's, her eyes glassy and unfocused. She wore only a thin undershirt on top, and Vivian realized with a shock that the shirt wrapped around Eleanor's chest must have been hers. "What's your name?" Vivian asked. The girl's eyes struggled to focus on Vivian's face. "Sharon. I stayed with her. Tried to keep her warm." "You saved her life," Vivian said, her voice breaking. "Thank you. Thank you so much." Sharon tried to smile, but the expression didn't quite form. Is she okay?" Before Vivian could answer, Sharon's eyes rolled back and she collapsed. Vivian caught her before she hit the pavement, pulling the girl against her other side, so she was now holding both her mother and this stranger who'd sacrificed everything to keep Eleanor alive. "Where's that ambulance?" Vivian shouted. As if summoned, sirens screamed into the alley. 2 ambulances, one right behind the other. Paramedics swarmed around them with practiced efficiency. 2 patients, both with severe hypothermia, Vivian said quickly, her business voice taking over even as her hands shook. "The elderly woman is my mother. She has early-stage dementia. The girl, Sharon, she's been keeping my mother alive all night." The paramedics worked quickly, checking vitals, wrapping both patients in thermal blankets, starting 4 lines. They loaded Eleanor onto one stretcher and Sharon onto another. "I'm riding with my mother," Vivian told the lead paramedic. "Ma'am, there's no room." "I'm riding with my mother," Vivian repeated, in a tone that made it clear this wasn't negotiable. They compromised by having both ambulances follow each other to Seattle General, lights and sirens cutting through the early morning darkness. Sharon woke to warmth. Real warmth, not the desperate shared heat of 2 freezing bodies. She was in a bed with clean white sheets and blankets that felt like clouds. And 4-line ran into her arm. Monitors beeped steadily beside her. Hospital. Panic hit immediately. Sharon tried to sit up, looking for her backpack, her clothes, any sign of her possessions. "Easy, easy." A nurse appeared at her bedside, gently pressing her back down. "You're okay. You're safe." "My backpack." "Right here." The nurse pulled it from under the bed. "Everything's here. We didn't touch anything except to check you medically." Sharon clutched the backpack to her chest, feeling for the locket through the fabric. "Still there." "The woman," Sharon said. "Eleanor. Is she?" "She's alive, thanks to you." The nurse smiled. "She's in the ICU, stable condition. Her daughter wants to see you when you're feeling better." Sharon's relief was immediately followed by new fear. Am I in trouble?" "Trouble?" The nurse looked genuinely confused. "Honey, you're a hero. You saved that woman's life." The door opened and a police officer stepped in. Sharon's stomach dropped. "Sharon Ellis?" the officer asked. Sharon nodded, unable to speak. The officer's stern expression softened. "I'm Officer Rodriguez. I wanted to thank you personally for what you did last night. Mrs. Hayes would have died without your help." Sharon stared at him, waiting for the other shoe to drop. For the questions about where her parents were, why she was on the streets, what would happen to her now. But Officer Rodriguez just pulled a card from his pocket. "This has the number for a youth services counselor. She's good people. When you're ready, she can help you figure out next steps. But that's for later. Right now, you just rest." He left, and Sharon was alone with the nurse. "I don't understand," Sharon whispered. "Nobody ever helps." The nurse's eyes were kind. "Sometimes people surprise you." Vivian stood outside her mother's ICU room, watching through the window as Eleanor slept. The doctors said she'd make a full recovery. A few more hours in the cold and it would have been a different story, but she'd arrived in time. Because of Sharon. Vivian pulled out her phone and watched the alley security footage the police had provided. The camera was from a building across the street, the angle distant but clear enough. She watched a tiny figure wrap a blanket around her mother. Take off her own shirt in freezing weather to provide more layers. Hold Eleanor upright every time she started to collapse. Rub her hands, share her food, refuse to leave even when her own body was shutting down. Vivian's vision blurred with tears. This child, because that's what Sharon was, just a child, had given everything to save a stranger. Had chosen compassion over self-preservation. Had stayed when the rest of the world walked past. Eleanor stirred, her eyes opening slowly. Vivian? Vivian rushed into the room, taking her mother's hand. I'm here, Mom. There was a girl, Eleanor said, her voice hoarse but clear. An angel. She saved me. Her name is Sharon. And yes, she saved you. I want to see her, Eleanor said. I need to thank her. You will, Vivian promised. As soon as you're both strong enough. But privately, Vivian was already planning much more than a simple thank you. This girl who'd saved her mother's life wasn't going back to the streets. Not if Vivian had anything to say about it. She just had to figure out how to convince a traumatized, homeless teenager to trust her. The answer to that question would determine everything that came next. Sharon spent 3 days in the hospital. The first day she slept. The doctors said her body was catching up on months of exhaustion, not just one brutal night. They treated her for hypothermia, dehydration, and malnutrition. They asked careful questions about her living situation, and Sharon answered truthfully, too tired to construct the lies she usually told. The second day, she was awake but wary. Social workers came by, speaking in soft voices about options and opportunities. Sharon listened with the practiced politeness of someone who'd learned that adults rarely followed through on their promises. She kept her backpack within arm's reach and mapped the exits in her mind. The third day, Eleanor came to visit. Sharon was sitting up in bed, picking at the hospital lunch she couldn't quite finish despite her hunger, when the door opened. Eleanor appeared in a wheelchair, pushed by Vivian. The older woman looked small and fragile wrapped in a thick robe, but her eyes were clear in a way they hadn't been that night in the alley. Sharon, Eleanor said, and her voice broke on the name. Sharon set down her fork, suddenly uncertain. Hi. Vivian wheeled Eleanor closer to the bed, then stepped back, giving them space. Eleanor reached out with a trembling hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Sharon took it. I remember, Eleanor said. Not everything but enough. I remember you holding me. Telling me stories, keeping me awake. Tears spilled down her weathered cheeks. You saved my life, child. You gave up everything to keep a stranger alive. Sharon didn't know what to say. In her mind, she'd just done what needed to be done. What her father would have done. I couldn't leave you, Sharon finally said. You would have died. So would you nearly. Eleanor squeezed her hand. The doctors said you were in worse shape than I was. Your body temperature was lower. You gave me your clothes, your blanket, your warmth. You beautiful, brave girl. Sharon felt tears burning in her own eyes. She'd been called many things in the past 7 months. Nuisance, vagrant, problem, but never beautiful. Never brave. I'm just Sharon, she whispered. No, Eleanor said firmly. You're extraordinary. And I will spend the rest of my life being grateful that you found me that night. Eleanor pulled Sharon into a careful hug, mindful of the 4 lines and monitors. Sharon stiffened at first. She'd gotten so used to keeping people at a distance, but then slowly relaxed into the embrace. Eleanor smelled like lavender and safety, and Sharon let herself have this moment of being held. When they separated, Vivian stepped forward. She'd been watching quietly, but now she pulled a chair beside Sharon's bed and sat down with the posture of someone preparing for a difficult conversation. Sharon, we need to talk about what happens next, Vivian said. Sharon's walls went back up immediately. I'll be fine. I know how to take care of myself. I know you do. You've proven that. But you shouldn't have to. Vivian leaned forward, her expression serious but kind. I've spoken with the social workers, with youth services, with my lawyers. You have options. Foster care, Sharon said flatly. I've been through that process. There's no room for kids my age. I'd end up in a group home at best. That's one option, Vivian agreed. Or you could come stay with us. Sharon blinked. What? We have a guest cottage on the property. It's small but comfortable. 2 bedrooms, a kitchenette, your own bathroom. You'd have privacy but wouldn't be alone. Vivian spoke quickly, as if she'd rehearsed this. You'd go back to school. We'd make sure you had everything you needed: clothes, food, support. No strings attached. You could leave any time if you weren't comfortable. Sharon stared at her, waiting for the catch. There was always a catch. Why? She asked. You don't know me. Because you saved my mother's life, Vivian said simply. Because you're 14 years old and you deserve better than sleeping in alleys. Because I have the resources to help and it would be unconscionable not to offer. People don't just do things like this, Sharon said. Not for people like me. People like you? Eleanor interjected. You mean heroes? Sharon shook her head. I mean homeless kids. Throwaways. We're invisible until we're inconvenient. The bitterness in her own voice surprised her. She'd worked hard not to feel sorry for herself, to stay focused on survival rather than fairness. But something about this moment, the warmth, the kindness, the impossible offer, cracked something open inside her. Vivian's expression softened with what looked like pain. You're not invisible to us. And you're definitely not a throwaway. What happened to you, losing your father, your mother leaving, that wasn't your fault. You deserved better from the world. The world doesn't care what I deserve. Maybe not, Vivian said. But I do. My mother does. And we're asking you to let us help. Sharon looked between them, Eleanor in her wheelchair, eyes still bright with tears, and Vivian leaning forward with earnest intensity. She thought about the guest cottage, about having her own room, about going back to school, which she'd loved before everything fell apart, about not being cold or hungry or afraid. She also thought about disappointment, about trusting adults who'd promised help before and then disappeared, about getting comfortable only to have it ripped away. What if it doesn't work out? Sharon asked quietly. What if I'm too broken? You're not broken, Eleanor said fiercely. You're hurt. There's a difference. And if it doesn't work out, Vivian added, we'll figure something else out. Together. But Sharon, I promise you, we're not going to abandon you. Whatever comes next, we're in this for the long term. Sharon wanted to believe her. God, she wanted to believe her so badly. Can I think about it? She asked. Of course, Vivian said. Take all the time you need. But even as she said it, Sharon could see the determination in Vivian's eyes. This woman who'd built a business empire wasn't going to take no for an answer. She'd just keep trying, keep offering, keep showing up. Maybe that was what Sharon needed. Someone who wouldn't give up on her, even when she gave up on herself. Sharon was discharged the next morning. She'd expected to leave with just her backpack and maybe a bus voucher, but instead Vivian arrived with bags from department stores. I guessed at sizes, Vivian said, looking almost nervous. If anything doesn't fit, we can exchange it. Sharon opened the first bag and found jeans, real jeans that weren't torn or stained. Thermal shirts. A winter coat that looked warm enough to survive anything. Socks. Underwear. A pair of boots that were actually her size. I can't accept all this, Sharon said, even though she wanted to. It's not charity, Vivian said. Think of it as payment for saving my mother's life. Though honestly, there's no payment that would be enough. Sharon ran her hand over the coat, feeling the quality of the material. When was the last time she'd had something new? Something chosen for her specifically? Thank you, she said quietly. She changed in the hospital bathroom, leaving her old clothes in the trash. When she emerged, Vivian smiled. You look good. Ready to see your new place? Sharon's stomach knotted with anxiety, but she nodded. The Hayes estate was nothing like Sharon had imagined. She'd pictured something cold and ostentatious, all marble and chandeliers. But while the main house was certainly large, the guest cottage Vivian led her to was warm and welcoming. Wood floors, comfortable furniture, windows that let in natural light. The bedroom had a real bed with a thick comforter and pillows that looked cloud-soft. The fridge is stocked, Vivian said, showing her the kitchenette. Help yourself to anything. If you need something that's not here, just let me know. The main house is through that path if you need anything. My mother's suite is on the first floor. Sharon set her backpack down carefully on the couch, still not quite believing this was real. "Why don't you settle in?" Vivian suggested. "Come up to the main house for dinner around 6? No pressure, but my mother would love to see you. And I make a mean lasagna." After Vivian left, Sharon stood in the middle of the cottage and slowly turned in a circle. This was hers. At least for now. A space that was warm and safe and clean. She explored cautiously, opening cabinets and drawers, finding dishes and utensils and towels. The bathroom had a shower with hot water. She tested it 3 times to make sure. The bedroom closet had hangers waiting for the new clothes. Finally, Sharon sat on the bed and pulled out her backpack. She dug through to the bottom, past the spare shirt and the empty granola bar wrapper she'd never thrown away, until her fingers found the plastic bag. Inside was her father's locket. She opened it carefully. On one side was a tiny photo of her as a baby, pink-cheeked and grinning. On the other side was a photo of her father, young and healthy, before the cancer. He was smiling at the camera like he had all the time in the world. "I wish you could see this, Dad," Sharon whispered. "I wish you could tell me if I'm making the right choice." But she knew what he'd say. Her father had believed in second chances, in the goodness of people, in hope even when things looked dark. He would have told her to trust Vivian and Eleanor, to let herself be helped. Sharon closed the locket and fastened it around her neck, feeling the familiar weight settle against her chest. Then she lay back on the bed, and stared at the ceiling. For the first time in 7 months, she let herself imagine a future that extended beyond the next meal, the next safe place to sleep, the next day of survival. Maybe she could go back to school, catch up on everything she'd missed. Maybe she could make friends again, have normal teenage problems instead of life or death ones. Maybe she could figure out who Sharon Ellis was when she wasn't just trying to survive. The possibilities felt overwhelming and terrifying and exhilarating all at once. Dinner that night was awkward at first. Sharon sat at the massive dining room table in the main house, acutely aware of how out of place she felt. Eleanor was there, still recovering but insistent on being present. Vivian served lasagna and salad and garlic bread, filling Sharon's plate with portions that seemed enormous. "Eat as much as you want," Vivian encouraged. "There's plenty more." Sharon ate slowly, savoring every bite. Real food, hot and fresh and abundant. She tried not to think about all the times she'd gone to bed hungry, all the meals she'd scrounged from dumpsters or stretched to last multiple days. Eleanor told stories about her younger days, about growing up in Seattle when it was a smaller city, about meeting her late husband and building a life together. Vivian added commentary, teasing her mother gently about her selective memory. Sharon mostly listened, but gradually she found herself relaxing, laughing at Eleanor's jokes, answering Vivian's careful questions about her favorite subjects in school, English and history, her hobbies before everything changed, reading, drawing, her dreams for the future. She'd always wanted to be a teacher, though that felt impossibly far away now. After dinner, they moved to the living room. A fire crackled in the fireplace, and Sharon curled up in an armchair that was probably worth more than everything she'd ever owned. "Sharon," Vivian said, setting down her coffee cup, "I want to be clear about something. This isn't temporary unless you want it to be. Eleanor and I talked about this. We'd like you to stay. Really stay. We can look into legal guardianship if you're comfortable with that, get you enrolled in school, make this official." Sharon's throat tightened. "You barely know me." "We know what matters," Eleanor said. "We know you're brave and kind and selfless. We know you deserve a chance. Let us give you that chance." Sharon looked at the fire, watching the flames dance. She thought about her father, about how he'd taught her to help others, to choose compassion over convenience. He'd lived that way until the very end. Maybe it was her turn to accept the help she'd given to Eleanor that night in the alley. "Okay," Sharon said quietly. "I'll stay." Eleanor's face lit up with joy. Vivian blinked rapidly, fighting tears. "You won't regret this," Vivian promised. "I know," Sharon said and realized she meant it. That night, Sharon stood at the window of her cottage bedroom, watching the sun set over Puget Sound. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink and purple, colors so vivid they didn't seem real. She touched the locket at her neck, feeling the weight of her father's memory and the lightness of new possibilities. 7 months ago, she'd lost everything. She'd learned to survive in a world that didn't care whether she lived or died. She'd become hard and guarded and alone. But that night in the alley had changed something. Not just for Eleanor but for Sharon too. She'd rediscovered the part of herself that still believed in helping others, that still chose compassion even when it cost everything. And somehow, impossibly, that choice had led her here. To safety. To warmth. To people who saw her as more than just a problem to be solved or ignored. Sharon didn't know what came next. School would be hard after missing so much. Learning to trust Vivian and Eleanor would take time. Building a new life wouldn't erase the pain of losing her old one. But for the first time since her father died, Sharon felt something she'd almost forgotten: hope. She thought about the girl she'd been 7 months ago, sheltered, naive, unprepared for loss. That girl was gone. In her place was someone stronger, someone who'd survived the impossible and come out the other side. Sharon didn't know who she'd become in this new life. But she was ready to find out. The sun dipped below the horizon, and Sharon watched as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Each one a small point of light in the vast darkness. Each one proof that even in the coldest nights, there was always something bright to hold on to. She pulled the curtains closed and turned back to her room, her safe, warm room, and smiled. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. But tonight, for the first time in a very long time, Sharon Ellis wasn't just surviving. She was living. And that made all the difference. The end. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazy and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.